Either ways, I'm very excited to be here in Berlin talking to you all. And this is actually my first time visiting Berlin, and it's to talk to you about something that I think really matters right now. But before I get into it, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. So, my name is Tilda, and I'm a dev advocate, a software engineer, and an open source program organizer. Now, before I acquired all of these titles, I started out as a contributor who was very much doubtful of her own skills and capabilities, and I wasn't very sure if I belonged in the open source space. But it was because someone more experienced than me took the time and effort to mentor me and to guide me. That is the reason why I am able to stand in this room talking to you all. And it is also why the subject of this talk matters so much to me personally. And it's also why I feel it's very urgent to talk about. Now, I want to paint a picture for you all. Let's say you maintain a medium-sized open source project and you are the sole maintainer. The issues are coming in, the PRs are piling up, and you are trying your best to work through the queue as best as you can. Then, one day, a PR lands, and it has this unusually detailed description. And this particular PR also claims to fix a critical bug. So, of course, you are encouraged because it looks like this person puts in a lot of effort into their contribution. That's when you start to look a bit closer and then you start to see the cracks. So, you see a method being called that doesn't even exist. The logic is so overcomplicated that it takes you a while to even understand what this person is trying to do. And there are also changes mixed in to the PR that have absolutely nothing to do with the issue. So, of course, the natural thing here is to start asking questions. How did you come about this solution? Walk me through your thinking process. Where did this method come from? What exactly are you trying to do here? And suddenly, this contributor who seemed very eager to fix something so critical is suddenly silent, and they cannot explain to you any of the things that they've done. Now, if you've ever maintained or reviewed any open source project, I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this particular scenario. And this is happening across so many open source projects now, and it's only going to get worse. And I've been on both sides of this as a contributor and as a mentor, and I've seen the pattern repeat enough times to know that it doesn't look like it's getting better, it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. But there's something about this as well. It's not just the reviewer's time that's been wasted. There's a bigger problem here. There's a wider problem. And that is what we are here to talk about. And I would like to hand it over to my co-speaker, Busayo, who will walk you through that.
All right, thanks, Tilda. So that silence that Tilda was describing earlier, I would just like to stay there for a moment so we really get into what it means. When you are a maintainer of an open source project, you get a bad PR. Yeah, it can be frustrating, you might be unhappy, but you have no obligation to whoever made that pull request. You can just close it and go about your day. But when you are a mentor or a potential mentor to a mentee, you can't just do that because there is someone on the other side, someone that should have been learning, someone you were trying to teach. And at this point, their silence is not just another inconvenience, it's a sign that something was wrong in the learning process. And the question that starts eating at you is, okay, why did they do this? Where did I lose them? Did I miss something along the lines? Was the task I assigned to them too vague? Were they confused and I didn't notice? That self-doubt as a mentor is also expensive. The time it will take you to review that submission that you don't understand and that is AI generated is also expensive. The erosion of trust that you're trying to build in this mentee is also expensive, and all of this compounds. And I know this because, very similar to Tilda, I've also been on both sides. We actually met through the Outreachy internship some few years ago, right? and I didn't know what I was doing at first. I needed mentors who would guide me, mentors who could tell the difference between, oh, someone that could genuinely do the work and someone that just give that work to an AI prompt. And the work I did, though I didn't deal with a lot of code, it sat between programs in open source, user research, and the like. So I was thinking about contributions differently from a lot of other mentors that were merging pull requests, working on code base. And when AI started changing what contributions look like, I noticed it in ways that are a little different from what code mentors or code project maintainers would have done. And so one day when myself and Tilda were talking and comparing notes, that's when we realized that we are seeing these things from both sides, both from the no code side and the code side, and that is what brought about this topic. So my name is Busayo Ojo. I'm a technical writer, an open source programs manager, and also a developer advocate. And I came from Lagos, Nigeria. So, before we get into what we did, I want us to look at this problem and see that, and we're on the same line, right? Because it's not just our experience, it's structural, it's happening everywhere. And here's what makes it structural: AI has dropped the cost of generating a contribution to almost zero, right? But the cost of reviewing an AI generated submission hasn't moved. You're still expending the same time, the same energy. A project maintainer has to still sit down, look through that work, whether it's real, whether it's not real. So that asymmetry is the whole problem. Godot, which is one of the biggest open source game engine there is, their core maintainer Remy, he said sorting through AI submissions is draining and demoralizing. And this is not just because the code is bad. I mean, it looks fine, it checks out, it's the description sounds confident. So they start second guessing every pull request they get from every new contributor. Okay, did the person write this? Did they use the AI tool? Did they use an AI tool? Do they understand what they wrote? Did they test it out? Are the results made up? So the same time process, the same mental strain it takes to review a real contribution is also the same it takes to review one that is not real and would lead nowhere. So, Carl, from the Bug Bounty program, which was running for 30 years, was recently shut down in January by Daniel Sternberg. And his reason was simple. He said the signal had collapsed. 20 reports in the first 3 weeks of the year, and not one real issue. All of them were all AI generated. So Triad had become surprisingly unsurvivable. And also, GitHub, the platform where we know open source actually lives on, they built a kill switch, right? So maintainers can now turn off pull requests completely from their repositories. And the one mechanism, because we know how important pull request is to open source and open source projects, has been eradicated with that kill switch. So let's look at what these three responses have in common. The call bug bounty program was shut down. Another was locked to just collaborators. Only people that are collaborators on the repository could contribute. And GitHub decided we can now turn off pull requests. So every single defense works the exact same way. They shut the door. They no longer want to participate in that. So popular projects in open source are now deciding one by one that it's easier to just keep newcomers away rather than having to sort through a lot of AI generated submissions. And that is the real cost that we are talking about here. That door is silently being closed on to the next person, and it now eradicates one of the core values of open source, which is to learn, to get guidance, to grow, and then pass it on. I mean, that is how I'm here today, because somebody took the time to train me, then I get to train others as well. But with the way we close the doors on new contributors now, that has become difficult. And the easy reaction to all of this is to just blame the tool. Yes, AI is bad, move on. And that is exactly what we're not saying. What we're saying is this: the criterias we used to rely on to assess understanding, to assess the growth of contributors, new contributors, interns have changed. Before, when you get a polished, well described pull request, you know that, okay, this contributor had done a lot of research, they had probably gone through Stack Overflow. It used to be a reasonable proxy for effort and understanding for someone having walked through a problem, but it doesn't mean that anymore. And for most open source projects, sometimes it is a maintainer problem. You just adapt your review process, you can decide to close it, you get stricter, you move on. But with mentorship, where you're trying to build a relationship with your mentee, that is where it gets harder. And the gap is there, but it's just invisible right now. So Tilda would come and talk about the cycle.
Okay, so let's talk about why mentorship makes this especially harder. Now, we all know that open source thrives on mentorship, and it's the reason why a lot of us are able to do what we do in open source, because someone more experienced than us looked at us, guided us, gave us correct mentorship, and that is how the cycle keeps going. So you learn, you get guidance, you grow, and then you pass it on over and over again. But that cycle, as we know it, is now being threatened. The struggle used to be something that we could see, right? A contributor gets stuck. So they come to you and they tell you, oh, this is where I'm stuck. This is where I need help. And you as a mentor, you're able to identify where the gaps are. You're able to identify, okay, this is where I come in. That is how the mentor and mentee relationship is built. But now, everyone comes with a fully formed answer. Whether the answer is right or wrong, it still looks like it's a well or a complete answer. And when you ask them how they got there, they cannot explain to you how they arrived at whatever contribution or whatever reasoning that they arrived at. So the gap is still there, it's just invisible now. We cannot see it. And this is not exactly the first time that mentors have had to deal with things like this. I mean, some of us grew up in the age of Stack Overflow, where you had to go through several questions and answers to get to something that is not exactly what you're looking for, but close enough for you to tailor and tailor to your own needs. You search, you do research, you know how to ask the right questions. And as you are doing your research, as you are opening those 100 tabs and clicking through each one by one, trying to find that answer, you are learning as you go. You are learning context, you are learning adjacent things, and you are building understanding. And then eventually, you find something that is close enough to the problem that you are trying to solve, and then you tailor that to your own needs, because it was never a ready-made answer for you. But now, that has changed. The steps have been cut down to just one. All you have to do is write a prompt and you get an answer that is specifically for you. So the struggle that used to happen in between all of that research, where you are trying to learn and figure out what it is you are looking for, is no longer there. It has been simplified to just one thing: write a prompt. So how exactly does a mentor even know where to begin? Like my co-speaker said, it's not a question of whether AI is good or AI is bad. It's a question of how our community practices have to adapt to make sure that the values that make open source what it is don't get lost in the process. And this is not exactly a new challenge for open source, because communities have had to face uncomfortable shifts before. But the important thing, or the things that got them through it, is being very intentional and deliberate about how they responded to it. And I believe that this AI era is another thing that we have to be intentional about the way we respond to it. So there are people who have been thinking about this. I recently came across a post by Abby Mays where she proposes a 3Cs framework for maintainers thinking about where to invest their mentorship energy. So the first C is comprehension. Do they understand the problem well enough to propose this change? The second is context. Do they give you what you need to review their work? And then lastly, we have continuity. Do they keep coming back? Now, this is a useful starting point, but our talk is more for the people who've already decided that they want to invest in new contributors and are looking for practical steps to make that mentorship work in this new landscape. Because what we cannot do is close our doors to mentoring because of this. And for us to be able to figure out how to keep those doors open, it also means that we make some mistakes first. And I would like to tell you about some of the mistakes that we made. Now, the first mistake that we made was directly asking, did you use AI? Now, of course, this is like a natural instinct. Of course you ask, did you use AI? It feels like the most direct way to get to the truth. But the problem with that question is, the moment you ask this question, you've put the contributor on trial. Because there are two ways this could work. If they did use AI, they probably wouldn't admit it to you right there and there, because it's a thing of being embarrassed that the work that they submitted is not exactly theirs. And then if they didn't use AI, now they have to defend themselves against an accusation that was never even true. So either way, the conversation shuts down before it even starts. And let's say they do say, oh, yes, I did use AI. Knowing that they used AI doesn't exactly tell you anything about whether they understood what they submitted or not. It doesn't tell you where the gaps are. It doesn't give you anything to work with as a mentor. So that question, did you use AI, is all about the tool. But that's not exactly the question that should be asked. The right question should always be about understanding. And it took us a while to figure that out. Now, the second failure. We relied on output alone to assess whether someone was learning. And for a long time, this felt like enough, right? If a contributor submits work, the work looks good, it passes review, and then you move on. Output seemed like a reasonable proxy for understanding. If someone could produce something that worked, it meant that they probably knew what they were doing. But as we know now, that assumption no longer holds up, because someone could make a contribution that looks absolutely perfect. And then you try to sit them down and, okay, walk me through how you came about this. And they cannot tell you anything. And it's not because they are suddenly nervous about answering your question. No, it's because the understanding is just not there. The work is there, but the learning is not. So the output doesn't exactly give you a proper assessment of whether the contributor knows what they are doing or not. Now, what was the third failure? The third failure was probably the most uncomfortable one for us to recognize, and I'll also tell you why from a personal experience. So I was mentoring someone recently, and she came to me with a bug that she couldn't fix. And of course, when someone comes to you with something like that, the first thing you do is you ask questions. What did you try? Walk me what you think could be causing this. And she couldn't answer any of those questions because she just did not understand any of the things that she had done. So how could she possibly also understand what could possibly be wrong? So I knew exactly why this was happening, because this was not the first time that we had been here before. And I had had this same conversation before with her as well. I knew that she was relying heavily on AI, and outrightly I told her you cannot, because it is very important at this stage of your learning that you do not rely on a tool to help you learn. Now, the thing about that is I banned it outrightly, but it didn't really change anything because we still came back to the same thing. She was still using the AI tool. And at some point, I had to self-reflect and ask myself, was my instruction or my outright ban of the tool helping her learn, or was I just removing the tool without really replacing it with anything? And what I had done was just react to the symptom. She was using AI in a way that was getting in the way of her learning, and my response, of course, was just to ban it. But I hadn't sat down and actually established what responsible use looked like, what was acceptable, what wasn't, what the expectation was, and why. And that was the failure. Because it's very possible to assume that people or contributors should know exactly how to use AI. They should understand the norms around AI use. But sometimes they do not. And it is up to us sometimes to also define those expectations. Now, I'm not saying that contributors are not responsible for the work they submit. Absolutely, that's not what I'm saying. Contributors do have a responsibility for the work that they submit. But at the same time, you cannot really hold people to a standard that was never clearly defined. So you call them out for crossing a line, but you never drew the line in the first place. And that is a problem. So when you tell someone no, without explaining what or why you are saying no, it doesn't really help. Which is why I would like to hand it over to my co-speaker Busayo to tell you about the things that did work.
Thanks, Tilda. Okay, so let's talk about what we found that actually helped. And to be clear, none of this is from a policy decision. It just came from trying out different things in our communities, seeing what failed, and then adjusting. So the first shift, which I would say was the simplest and honestly the most important, was instead of asking contributors or interns outrightly that did you use AI, which made them defensive, we started asking people to be open about what they did with AI. So, what tool did you use? Was it Claude? Was it Gemini? Was it ChatGPT? What did you use it for? Did it write out the entire document for you? Did you use it to fine tune your grammar? Did you use it to fix punctuation issues? What did you do yourself? So that reframe changed a lot of things. I mean, we do not want to be oblivious. We already know that AI is here to stay, and trying to just be oblivious would only deter people and push them away and make them dishonest. But now we just wanted to know what exactly did you contribute and what did your AI tool contribute? And we could then have a real conversation about whether they even understood what they were submitting at all. So the second shift was in how I also reviewed submitted work, right? As I mentioned, I did not do a lot of code submission. I was more in the no code space. I once had a contributor that submitted a user research feedback from a school because some of the work we did involved going to schools in low resource communities. And the research sounded good. I mean, it was very robust. And from looking at the documents, you would think it made sense. But like upon diving down, I saw that there were some feedbacks, right, from young learners that were between the ages of like 7 to 10. And if we're being honest, for children in local communities, it would be impossible for them to say things like that. So I asked her, what did you use to get this feedback? And she then said, oh, yes, she used an AI tool, right? Because we know AI can obviously hallucinate into relationships, and it's always an ongoing conversation. So when I stopped asking, how does this work? And started asking, can you walk me through what you asked that made this person say this? What did you do to arrive at this destination? Why this approach? Why this process? What if we did it this way instead? Do you think we would still get this result? You can't really fake your way through a live explanation of your own thought process. And that is one place where this gap in those that use AI tools and those that do the work themselves will immediately show up. So another thing I did was also to restructure my tasks. It was now a more of less of do this and here's a problem that we've been noticing happening. Let's say partners in this East African region constantly have this problem. How would you approach it? How would you fix it? What is your answer to that? Their thought process, the explanation also became part of the deliverable that we're expecting from them. And it's also a good place to find out if that contributor really understands what is real and what is not. Lastly, live peering. And reframing AI to be a learning tool was also something I did and it worked for me. But it just is not an easy process. And I would say this because I experienced it myself. But peering is really revealing because what you can't hide in real time is what we need to know. And the moment somebody, you ask a question, you see them take a long while to respond, and it's not like they're thinking through it, but they are reaching for a tool. That's when you already know that there is a problem with whatever is happening with this mentee, right? But I'll be honest, peering requires time. And for a lot of mentors or potential mentors, we all have our daily full time jobs, right? So it honestly cannot be easy. So for me, we had a pre-mentorship stage, which was the application period. So what I tried to do was to have clear, simple guides that whoever was reading it could easily understand what was expected of them. And whoever just took that extra mile would easily get what needed to be done. And we saw a difference in the next cohort of contributors that we were getting. People took their time more. We could tell the difference between those that did some research, did more work than those who did not, right? So overall, what really helped was reframing how we spoke about AI itself. We didn't want to talk about it as something we wanted to catch people using, but we wanted them to use it the right way as a tutor, not an answer machine. So some took that immediately, others still had to be shown what to do, and it really changed the dynamic in the project I was mentoring for at that time. That change of, are you using AI to, how are you using it? Are you still learning even though you're using it? Was a big shift. So we're not claiming to have all the answers, right? I mean, this is going to be a recurring conversation for a very long time. There are a lot of talks happening today that are still on this topic of AI. There's also another panel I'm really looking out for, right, on this topic of AI. So AI is here to stay, but we need to find a way to work around it. So Tilda would walk us through what we are still figuring out.
Now, before I tell you what the question is that I would like to leave you with, I would like to reiterate something. We all know that AI use in open source contributions is already happening. And we also have to be honest to ourselves about what that means. And how we respond is equally as important so we don't unintentionally slam the door shut on new contributors who want to walk in. And remember that cycle we talked about in the beginning where you learn, you get guidance, you grow, and then you pass it on. That only works if we keep bringing people in. So if we respond to this moment by shutting the doors, that cycle breaks. And that is a cost that we cannot afford because open source thrives on mentorship. So I started contributing to open source before AI became as accessible as it is now. And that meant spending days trying to figure out how exactly to navigate a project, how to find something to work on, how do I even contribute. But the thing with that struggling is I was learning along the way. And as I was struggling, something would click until I would have most of the pieces of the puzzle enough to figure out, okay, this is what I need to do. Now, I'm not saying that struggle wasn't frustrating, it was, but again, it was where a lot of that learning happened. But that path looks very different now. And there's a lot to say about what skipping that phase might mean, but that's not why we are giving this talk. This talk is about making sure the values that make open source what it is today are not lost. And that also means doing some intentional thinking about how we respond to this. So, the question I would like to leave you with is this. How do you support genuine learning without accidentally shutting out the people who needed that bridge most? Now, there's no one size fits all answer to that question. Some of the things we've talked about today might work for your project. Some you might need to tweak a bit for your own project. But the important thing is that we are responding to this uncertainty with a mindset of moving forward and not shutting our doors.
Okay, so we're at the end. right, of this talk. But just to like reiterate what we've been talking about for the past few minutes, and I want to be clear about something. This talk isn't absolution for contributors or interns who submit work that they do not understand. It is a real problem. It is a serious issue right now in a lot of communities and even in the open source space. And we are not trying to minimize it in any way. If someone is actually out there passing off AI generated content as theirs, it is truly wrong. But what we keep coming back to is the fact that community managers, project maintainers, project mentors, they have far more control over how they respond and adapt to the use of AI and the evolvement of AI than the behavior of somebody else, right? So you cannot control what an individual will submit, but you can control the environment in your community that that individual is trying to submit that contribution into. So this is what it looks like in practice. The first suggestion for everyone here today would be to state out what is acceptable in your community. If you have a project README, you can have a please, here's our guidelines on the use of AI and AI tools. Do you accept it at all? Fine. If you do not want AI generated contributions at all, you can also state that clearly there. Whoever isn't ready to do the work can as well leave, as opposed to wasting your time reviewing tons of AI generated content. So if you do allow them use AI, you can also mention that you would like to know what they did with it, how they used it, not to catch them, but to have a real conversation with them about what they do understand and what they do not. Another good suggestion would be to change how you review your submitted work, right? Not, does this work? Is that it? But can you explain the thought process that led you to this? Can you explain how you arrived at this submission, right? So another good option is to restructure the task so that the thinking process is also part of the deliverable. It makes the process visible, right? How they thought about it, how they explained it, and not just seeing a generated output. Also, our communities should be a safe space, right? The only way we can have young people, young contributors, is when they feel this community is welcoming, okay? And when they know that they can ask basic questions, right? I have been in a lot of different communities, and there are some where I never went back, and there are some that I still contribute to them up until this day. And like I mentioned, life pairing, if there are good mentors in your community, you can just mention it casually. In the chaos community, we have something called the newcomers hangout. So when new people join, we just have a quick chat. If they would want someone to guide them, we make that option available. So you can't control what someone submits, but you can control the environment you build around them. Thank you all so much for taking out the time to listen to our talks. This is how you say thank you. And so that's Isoko, I'm Yoruba. Those are Nigerian languages at the top, and this is French, German, and thank you all so much. I'll be taking questions now if there are any.
Okay, thank you for the talk, very insightful. So maybe just to start the questions, I had just one question about the context of your project, and you were talking about mentoring young people. Can you tell us about what kind of context you're mentoring in, like open source projects, students, younger people, high schools, please?
Okay, thank you for that question. It's a good one. So I think what we discussed today could apply to a whole range of people, university students and all of that. But currently at the moment, the project I mentor for is the OPIA project. And what OPIA is all about, it's a online learning platform where children in low resource environments can get easy access to maths learning. So like I mentioned, we do a lot of user research, partnership work, go-to-market strategy. So we get contributors that would like to volunteer and help out. So we always have to like sit down with them, put them through, mentor them along that process. And yeah, that's how that works. Tilda, do you want to add?
Just to add a little more to Busayo's answer, I organized an open source internship program where you'd have several open source communities participate in the internship program. So you had people from different stages in their career, early stage, mid stage, whatever stage, come and participate in this internship. So what we've talked about today, the experiences we've shared, is something that we've seen across several communities with different demographics. So this talk is meant to work for a lot of open source communities, whether it's a student community, it's mostly early stage community, any. That is why we both came together to put together this talk so that we could share our experiences from these communities.
Okay, thank you very much. We have just one question for the online audience, so I will read it. What's the point in asking what specific model or tool they used? It should matter what's the output, not the model. No, so it's more than a suggestion.
Okay. Oh, so the person is saying we shouldn't ask for the tool.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as a good suggestion. It is a suggestion, right? Do you want to add anything? Oh, thank you to whoever suggested that.
Maybe one question from the audience here.
Yeah, thank you for the very insightful talk. So I thought the 3C framework was very interesting, and it seems you've been focusing mostly on the first two C's that you mentioned, the comprehension and context. I would be interested in knowing if you have any advice as well for assessing the continuity, because I feel like, especially for the next generation of software developers, if they have like one failure, they easily get discouraged, and that way you cannot really assess their potential for continuity.
That is a very good question, thank you. Now, continuity is all about asking, do these contributors come back? Now, when I started contributing to open source, I started out with a particularly difficult project because the tools were completely new to me. And so after a couple of weeks of struggling, I just went completely silent on the pull request and I left it for several weeks or even months. And the mentor who was monitoring my contribution at the time came and asked me a simple question like, do you need help with this? And that single question was all it took for me to come back and say, yes, I do need help. I have been struggling, and this is how I would like to be helped. So it can be very clear that your contributors will come back because you see someone who made their very first contribution, and they are so encouraged by the experience that they have from your community that they come back a second time, or they even ask you, okay, what else can I do? How much more help can I provide? So these things can be very clear. Is someone, a first-time contributor, coming back and saying, I want to do more, I want to help? And it doesn't have to be just contributions. They could help in other ways. For example, monitoring forums, answering questions. There's so many ways to measure whether contributors come back. And I think the important thing to take from this is, how does your community experience, how does it encourage them to come back? Because if the community experience is not the best, if they are faced with a very stern or unwelcoming environment, they're less likely to come back and want to do more. But when they are encouraged to keep doing more in your community, they are more likely to come back. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you again to Busayo and Tilda. So.